Hi, I'm Greg Hunter. This is the weekly news wrap-up for Friday, September 12th, 2014. America is at war in the Middle East. Yes, President Obama came out on national media this week and said ISIS terrorists in eastern Syria and western Iraq will find no safe haven. He also added that ultimately he wanted to destroy ISIL. Of course, Secretary of State John Kerry kind of walked that back, when he was asked by CNN, isn't this war? And he says, no, I don't think you should frame it that way. He said that, but it is a, quote, significant counterterror operation. Not war, a significant counterterror operation. To that I say, horse hooey. I don't care. We are at war. Oh, I know there's going to be no boots on the ground other than the 1,600 that we've already sent over there. We've sent additional 450 to bring it to 1,600 as advisors in Iraq. But, it's going to be an air campaign. We're going to start bombing them. We're going to start chasing them all over western Iraq and bombing them. And that includes Syria. And I'll get to the Syria question in just a minute, Syria bombing. But, we're going to double down on our strategy of arming the moderate terrorists. Remember, I've been telling you this for months, probably a year and a half, about how, we're arming these Syrian rebels who are in part Al-Qaeda. And then, even John Kerry said, it's about 20%. 1 in 5. Foreign press had it at a half. Half were Al-Qaeda who were fighting. And we were arming these rebels that were supposed to be moderate. And lo and behold, Al-Qaeda got weapons. And ISIS is an offshoot. It grew out of Al-Qaeda. It's actually an older organization, but it grew and gained power from Al-Qaeda. And ISIS is so nasty that Al-Qaeda, members of Al-Qaeda that were too moderate were executed by ISIS. That's the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. The president likes to use ISIL, the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant. It's the Islamic State, the Caliphate. I like ISIS, frankly. A lot of people are saying ISIS. The president says ISIL. Same thing. Money names, same thing. And, I watched his whole speech, and I thought, he's trying to sell it, and he's trying to look tough. We're going to ultimately destroy ISIL. That was his quote. And I'm thinking, this is a political speech. His poll numbers stink. They've had multiple polls that think that Republicans protect the country better, and he's not a very good president, and his poll numbers are the worst. They are going right into the midterm election, and I'm sure Democrats were like, "Hey, Mr. President, you got to say something. You got to do something." You remember when he came out and said he didn't have a strategy? How could they let the president go out there and be that ill-prepared in a press conference? We don't have a strategy yet. And then he comes out and says, well, we're going to degrade and destroy ISIL. Well, and manage it. And, make it a manageable problem. And now he's like, oh, no, we're going to ultimately destroy ISIL. No management here. But I think that's really what the speech, the words, it talks cheap and money buys whiskey. Words are easy to say. And I really think the strategy with no boots on the ground, we're just going to do this from the air. And other fighters, like the moderate Syrian rebels. And we had them going towards, Assad. And now we're going to turn them around and send them back towards ISIS. And we're going to vet them this time. We're going to double down on this ridiculous strategy. Lots of things can go terribly wrong. I mean, what happens if the air campaign doesn't work? Let me the first thing. Speaking of the air campaign, we don't have any status of forces agreement. Status of forces agreement. That shows how you're going to you're going to cooperate, and they're going to allow you use of bases and runways, and also going to give you immunity. In case one of your pilots drops a bomb on a wedding party by accident. We don't have that. So our pilots and our soldiers don't get hauled into an Iraqi court and tried and spend the next 20 years in Iraq. Or that the United States doesn't get sued indefinitely for all the death and destruction that, when you have war, it's messy, ugly, and people die. And, Iraq knows that. I mean, they lost, more than 1 million people, civilians were killed in the whole, Iraq conflict with the Bush administration. And incidentally, the Bush administration, we shouldn't have gone into Iraq. But, we went there. I mean, I think it was a drummed-up war over weapons of mass destruction that they didn't find. Some people say they moved them to Syria. But still, I mean, when Obama ran for president and he took over from the Bush administration, you know, the foreign situation's the one you inherit, the domestic situation's the one you inherit. And, you know, before Bush left off, he said, we shouldn't leave too soon. You know, it could cause, you know, a terrible terror group to, I'm paraphrasing, to rise up, and they could do horrible things to people, you know, like crucify people and cut their heads off, you know, with a butcher knife. I mean, Bush looks almost like, you know, clairvoyant. He looks brilliant. I mean, and then we ended up leaving, and he talked about how, well, we may have to go back in there at a later time with more of our treasure and more, you know, go back in if we go too early and don't have the place stabilized. Well, where are we? Where are we? And what happens if we fund these new rebels and they decide that, well, you know, we can't beat ISIS, we're gonna join them. Or we give new weapons, and they don't end up in ISIS' hands, but Al-Qaeda gets them. You know, the people that are, when they're moderate, that ISIS kills them. You know, Al-Qaeda is still a terror group, last I checked. Or what happens if these people, you know, like the Kurds and these moderate Arabs and whatever, this coalition, which Great Britain is not part of. And, you know, they start coming up against these ISIS fighters that are evidently pretty well trained, and some people say it's the CIA operation, that they train these guys. At the very least, the weapons came from the United States. I mean, you could see them on TV. We were sending weapons, you know, to Syria for a long time. There was even charges of gun running out of the Benghazi consulate. That came from members of Congress. And what happens if these weapons that we decide to give these moderate terrorists, rebels, end up in the hands of ISIS or end up in the hands of Al-Qaeda? Oh, we're going to vet them this time. Oh, we're going to vet them. And on top of that, now we are going to start flying sorties for the Shia government in Iraq and Baghdad, to control, you know, from Baghdad south, basically. And, you know, the Shias are basically the Iranians. And the Iranians, Shia, are helping the Assad regime, which we were trying to get rid of the Assad regime. And the Iranians were helping and backing the Assad regime along with the Russians. Remember I told you how the Russians weren't going to let Syria fall? They got a naval base in Tartus. It's on the eastern Mediterranean. They're not going to let that fall. Where's Syria? Oh, well, ISIS has taken over part of it, but Assad's still there, and Russia still has their base. And now we're going to be flying missions to back the Shia Muslim majority in Baghdad. And we were fighting the Shias backing Assad. Can you understand how cuckoo crazy this is? And now we want the rebels that were fighting Assad to turn around and fight the ISIS, Sunnis, also Sunnis. And then let's talk about, I'll talk about this, the foreign minister, Sergey Lavrov, let's call him Lavrov, says that, hey, you know, this is, you know, we're worried about you bombing in Syria, and then you, under the pretext of, you know, fighting terrorism, and then you start targeting our ally, Assad, who we've been backing all this time, to weaken him, and we don't want that to happen. And also, Lavrov said, this is more about a pipeline than it is about fighting terrorism. This is about a pipeline that the Ataris, they want. They want to put a pipeline, force one, through this revolution or whatever you want to call it, through Syria, and they want to come out on the eastern Mediterranean. They want to start, supplying natural gas to Europe. Of course, that too will cut into Russia's business. But Lavrov came out and said, this is more about a pipeline than terrorism, basically, I'm paraphrasing. And where did you hear that? Well, you heard that here on USA Watchdog. One of my guests brought up that. I can't remember who it was, but somebody brought that up clearly, said this is more about a pipeline. This is about a pipeline. Sure enough, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov says this is about a pipeline. So this is and what's going to happen if these guys, these people that we're going to fund to fight our war for us or fight the ISIS, and they start losing, and they start losing bad, and they get overrun, and air power ain't enough to stop them. I mean, they got these people from all over the world flocking in there to fight with ISIS. I mean, we have 100 people supposedly from America to fight with ISIS in many major countries in Europe and in Russia, and even Australia has, people fighting for ISIS, something like 7,500. And what happens if that doesn't work? We just let all those people die? We just let Baghdad get overrun? What do we call up the Russians and say, hey, we can't do this. You need your soldiers to come down here in Baghdad. Hey, Iran, why don't you bring your Republican Guard across that border and get in Baghdad and you fight this war for us? Because, Iranians, they're afraid of these crazy ISIS people. I think everybody's afraid of them. When they crucify people and cut their heads off, that's terrorism, right? But this is not just a few terrorists. This is an army. And again, this is about a pipeline that Qatar wants to have, and they're also funding the ISIS. And, Saudi Arabia funding ISIS. These are supposed to be our allies, right? Speaking of natural gas, Europe is about to have theirs cut off. Now we have new sanctions, coming from the U.S. and the EU against Russia over the Ukraine crisis. Yep, new sanctions, and and the biggie is Russian oil companies, energy companies, Gazprom, Rosneft, people like that. They're gonna sanction these oil companies. Hey, guess what's going to happen to natural gas supplies from Russia? They're going to be cut. Guess what's going to happen to the price of natural gas from Russia? Oh, yeah, that's going to go up. And they're also targeting Russian banks. Now, the Russians have taken it on the chin. I mean, the ruble's been, crushed, but still, the Russians are tough. And they are, pondering what they're going to do. Now, what do you bet it's cutting off somebody's gas supply and jacking prices sky high and say, well, where are you going to get your gas this winter? Which is, in Europe, because it's a lot farther north than America in some places, winter's going to be here sooner than you think. And they're going to cut the supply and jack the price up. That's just one of the things they're going to do. Oh, and newsflash. The U.S. says there's about 1,000 Russian fighters and armor inside Ukraine. Russians deny that, have always denied that. I think that they have, but their foreign, United Nations ambassadors say, well, we do have, volunteers there. Well, whatever. But here's the story. Poroshenko, the president of Ukraine, and this was announced in the New York Times, said, well, the Russian fighters are gone. Mostly gone. They're gone. Excuse me? President of Ukraine, which made this accusation to begin with, is now saying, the Russian fighters, they're gone. According to the New York Times. So what's with the increased sanctions against Russia? They got a ceasefire. It's holding. They're trying to work something out. These are, pro-Russian separatists. These are people that speak Russian in eastern Ukraine. They look like they're trying to work out something. And this is, they may not. But this is the time where you throw huge sanctions against Russia's oil companies. I think Gazprom's the biggest in the world, or Rosneft. One of them is. They're huge. And now it's time for some sanctions while they're not shooting? What do you think is going to happen to the teetering economies, most of which are in recession? Some of them are in depression. What do you think is going to happen to the teetering economy in the EU? Well, that's going to turn into a depression continent-wide. Are they inviting financial calamity? Do they want that to happen? Do they want war? Or both at the same time? As Jim Sinclair said, and that's who said this thing I said it last week, this is too stupid to be stupid. They must know this. Unbelievable. The Russians, they look like the sane ones. Finally, USA Watchdog. I had a poll. I was going to use it in the weekly news wrap-up, and I had it up for months. So I thought, I'll use the data out of this. I had a lot of, hundreds and hundreds of responses, and I said something to the effect: is Obamacare going to make you want to vote more for a Republican or for a Democrat in the November midterm elections? And I had Republican, and I had Democrat, and I had I don't know, and I had I don't care. And listen, for the longest time, the Democrat choice was coming in last. It was losing to I don't know and I don't care. And the Republicans, after months, were pretty much hanging around 72%. That people were going to vote Republican because of Obamacare. Well, lo and behold, somebody writes me on the site and says, "Wow, I just looked at your poll. I can't believe it. It was like 38% are going to vote Democrat. I can't believe it. And only 43% are going to vote Republican." The trolls have been on the site. Click, 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 voting, Democrat, 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 to alter the perception of what people think. But, listen, I looked at this for months. 72%, 70, 75, 78, 72. That's where the poll was running. Then all of a sudden, in a week or so, boom, it's all turned around. Trolls. And that's kind of a backhanded compliment, because really if the trolls think USA Watchdog, a poll on USA Watchdog, is worth altering to try to make the Democrats look better than what they're looking now, then I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you for supporting USA Watchdog with your comments. I had a lively week of comments, good information, good links this week. Thank you for supporting us with your comments. Thank you for supporting us with your donations. That helps us out. That's the way I see it. I'm Greg Hunter. Fear not.